Welcome back to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. Arizona, the desert state where scorching heat meets frozen terror, where ancient minds breathe like living lungs and the dead don't stay buried. Tonight, I'm bringing you 11 encounters that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Grand Canyon State. From a prison cell that refuses to release its victims to a creature with human eyes and a coyote's body, these stories came from people who barely made it out alive. Some of them are still running. The most terrifying places aren't in movies. They're hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone foolish enough to find them. Let's start with a place where darkness has a memory, and that memory is hungry. If you made it through all 11 stories, you're officially part of the Haunted Fears horror family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next terrifying journey. Smash the like button if these Arizona stories gave you chills, and drop a comment telling me which location you'd never dare to visit. Share this video with someone who thinks they're brave enough. I dare you. Until next time, stay safe out there, because you never know what's watching from the shadows. Have you ever been forgotten in a place where over 100 people died in agony? I have, and 3 hours in that darkness changed something inside me that I'll never get back. My name is Alia, and I've always had this stupid fascination with the paranormal. Ghost hunting shows, abandoned asylums, the whole deal. So when I heard the Yuma Territorial Prison was offering overnight paranormal investigations, I didn't hesitate. I booked a spot for their October tour, drove 6 hours through the desert, and showed up with my camera and voice recorder, like I was ready for anything. The prison sits right on the Colorado River, this massive adobe fortress that baked prisoners alive in the Arizona heat for 33 years. Over 3,000 men passed through those gates between 1876 and 1909. 111 of them never left. The guide, this older woman with tired eyes, walked our group through the main yard as the sun set. She told us about the escape attempts, the murders, the tuberculosis outbreak that killed dozens. But what she focused on most was the dark cell. It's exactly what it sounds like. A punishment cell carved into solid rock with no windows, no light, no ventilation. Prisoners were chained standing up, sometimes for weeks. Some went insane. Some died. The guide said people reported hearing whispers in Spanish, feeling hands on their ankles, seeing shadows move in the absolute darkness. I thought it was tourist trap nonsense. Then she asked if anyone wanted to experience it for 15 minutes as part of the investigation. I volunteered immediately. 3 other people joined me, but when we got to the cell door, this thick wooden thing with iron bands, 2 of them backed out. The third person, a guy about my age, went in first. He lasted maybe 8 minutes before he started banging on the door to get out. He was crying. Said something touched his face. The guide looked at me. Asked if I still wanted to try. I said yes. I'm stubborn like that. She led me into the cell, and I swear to God the temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment I stepped inside. The space was maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, carved straight out of the rock. There were iron rings bolted to the wall where they'd chain prisoners' wrists. The guide positioned me in the center, told me not to move around too much because the floor was uneven. She said she'd be right outside, and 15 minutes would go by fast. Then she closed the door. I've never experienced darkness like that. Not nighttime darkness, not eyes-closed darkness. This was absolute, suffocating. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. Couldn't see anything. The silence pressed against my eardrums. I started counting in my head to track the time. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. At around 200 Mississippi, I heard breathing that wasn't mine. It was slow, raspy, like someone with fluid in their lungs, coming from the corner to my left. I froze, told myself it was the air circulation, even though there was no air circulation. The breathing got closer. I could feel the space getting smaller, the walls pressing inward. My chest got tight. I wanted to call out, but my throat wouldn't work. Then something grabbed my ankle. Ice-cold fingers wrapped around my left ankle, right above my boot. I screamed, kicked out, hit nothing but air. The hand squeezed tighter. I lunged for where I thought the door was, slammed into the rock wall instead, and split my forehead open. Blood ran into my eyes. I screamed again, pounding on the walls, trying to find the door. Nobody came. I screamed until my voice gave out, pounded until my fists were raw. The hand on my ankle never let go. After what felt like hours, I heard other sounds. Metal scraping on stone, chains rattling, voices whispering in a language I didn't understand, but the tone was angry, desperate. I felt breath on my neck, smelled something rotten and old, like meat gone bad. Time stopped, meaning anything. I couldn't count anymore, couldn't think. I just stood there in the darkness, with invisible hands holding me down and voices screaming in my ears. When the door finally opened, the light hit me like a physical blow. I collapsed. The guide was standing there with her flashlight, and she looked terrified. She kept saying she was sorry, she forgot about me, she got caught up with another group member who had a panic attack in the yard. 3 hours. She'd left me in there for 3 hours. I couldn't speak, couldn't walk right. 2 other staff members had to help me to the office. They gave me water, cleaned up my forehead, kept apologizing. The guide was crying, saying she'd never done that before. She didn't know how it happened. I just sat there, shaking. When I finally got to my car, I looked at my ankle, the one where I felt the hand. There were bruises, 4 finger-shaped bruises, and 1 thumb mark, wrapped completely around my ankle in a grip pattern. My boot had been laced tight. Nothing could have gotten under it. But the bruises were there, purple and deep. That was 6 months ago. The bruises faded after 2 weeks, but I still feel that hand sometimes. At night, when I'm falling asleep, a cold grip on my ankle squeezing. I wake up gasping. I've stopped sleeping with my feet uncovered. I keep the lights on. The prison offered me a refund and asked me to sign a waiver saying I wouldn't sue. I signed it. Took the money. But I can't shake this feeling that I left something of myself in that cell. Or worse, that something from that cell followed me home. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of chains scraping across my bedroom floor. I turned on every light in my apartment. Didn't see anything. But when I got back in bed, my ankle was ice cold. And in the mirror across from my bed, I swear I saw a shadow standing in the corner behind me. I don't do paranormal investigations anymore. I don't even watch the shows, because I learned something in that Darkness at Yuma Territorial Prison. Some places hold on to their dead, and sometimes, when you volunteer to step into their world, they hold on to you too. The dark cell never let me go. Not really. And I don't think it ever will. What happens when you bring something home from a place soaked in a mother's grief? I found out 3 weeks ago, and now I can't get the smell of river water out of my bedroom. My name is Deborah, and I'm a landscape photographer. I've spent the last 5 years traveling around Arizona capturing the desert's raw beauty. Canyons, rock formations, abandoned places where nature reclaims what humans left behind. I'd heard about Luana's Canyon, though most people call it Slaughterhouse Canyon from another photographer. The story goes that back in the 1800s, a woman lived there with her children while her husband worked in the mines. He stopped coming back. She waited, ran out of food, went insane from starvation and grief, then drowned her children in the canyon's seasonal creek before killing herself. People say you can still hear her crying for them at night. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in light, composition, and the way shadows fall across ancient stone. So when I planned my trip to Kingman, Slaughterhouse Canyon was on my list. Just another location, just another shoot. I hiked in alone on a Tuesday morning in late September. The trail was rougher than I expected. Loose rocks, steep drops, thick brush tearing at my clothes. The canyon walls rose up on both sides, dark red stone stained even darker in places by mineral deposits. Or at least, that's what I told myself they were. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just my footsteps and my breathing. I reached the area where the old cabin supposedly stood. Nothing left now but a few foundation stones and some rotted wood. The creek bed was right there, bone dry and cracked. I set up my tripod and started shooting. The light was perfect, harsh and unforgiving, exactly what I wanted. I must have taken 50 photos, adjusting angles, playing with exposure. I was completely focused on my work. That's when I heard it. A woman crying, not loud, not close, but echoing off the canyon walls in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. I stopped, looked around. The canyon was empty. I called out. Nobody answered. Just that crying, steady and heartbroken, like someone who'd been crying for so long they didn't know how to stop. I pulled out my phone and hit record. The sound was clear, unmistakable. A woman's voice, sobbing, with words I couldn't quite make out underneath. I recorded for 2 minutes. The crying never changed pitch, never moved. Then it stopped. Just cut off mid-sob. The silence that followed felt wrong, like the canyon was holding its breath. I don't give up on a shoot easily, and I'd driven 3 hours for these photos. I kept taking photos. Got some incredible shots of the canyon walls in the afternoon light, the shadows stretching long across the dry creek bed. I even found some petroglyphs on a sheltered rock face, ancient symbols worn almost smooth by time. I photographed those too. By the time I hiked back to my car, the sun was setting. I felt accomplished. I drove to my hotel in Kingman, uploaded my photos, ordered takeout. Normal evening. I fell asleep around 11, exhausted from the hike. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to my bathroom light turning on by itself. I lay there, staring at the strip of light under the bathroom door, telling myself it was faulty wiring. Old hotel. Happens all the time. I got up to turn it off. The mirror was covered in handprints. Small handprints like a child's made of water. They were everywhere, overlapping, frantic, as if someone had been slapping the glass over and over. Water was still dripping down the mirror, pooling on the counter. I touched one of the prints. My finger came away wet, cold. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the chair by the window, with all the lights on until dawn. When I finally packed up to leave, I checked the bathroom one more time. The mirror was dry, no handprints, no water. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, bad dreams. I drove home to Phoenix. That's when things got worse. The first night in my own apartment, I heard children crying. It started just after midnight. Soft at first, then louder. Multiple voices, young voices crying for their mother. I searched every room, checked outside. Nothing. The crying came from everywhere, and nowhere. It lasted 20 minutes, then stopped. The next morning, my bedroom smelled like river water, dank and organic, the smell of algae and wet mud. I checked for leaks, sniffed the air vents, tore apart my closet, found nothing. But the smell wouldn't go away. The handprints started appearing after that. On my bathroom mirror every morning, on my bedroom windows at random times, on my car windshield when I came out of the grocery store at dusk, always small, always wet. Some nights I'd hear the crying at 4:30 a.m. Other nights, midnight, there was no pattern, no way to prepare. I tried everything. Sage, salt lines. A priest came and blessed the apartment. He left looking disturbed, said there was something here but he couldn't help me. Said I'd brought it with me from somewhere. I knew exactly where. Last week I woke up at dawn, 5:45 a.m. according to my phone, to find wet footprints leading from my bedroom door to my bed. Child-sized, 5 sets of them. The footprints stopped, right at my bedside, like someone had been standing there watching me sleep. My sheets were damp where they ended, and when I pulled back the blanket, there were 5 muddy handprints on my mattress, right where my body had been lying. I don't sleep in my bedroom anymore. I've been staying on my couch with every light in the apartment on, but it doesn't matter. The children still cry, sometimes at night. sometimes during the day when I'm trying to work. And underneath their cries, I hear her, that same woman from the canyon sobbing, calling for them. Come back. Please come back. My bedroom door opens by itself now. The smell of river water is getting stronger. Yesterday, I found mud on my bathroom floor, actual mud, thick and dark, like it came from a creek bed. I haven't been near any water, haven't left my apartment in 3 days. I went back to my photos from the canyon. In the shots of the dry creek bed, there's something I didn't see before. In the shadows where the old cabin used to be, there are figures, transparent but there. A woman and 5 small shapes behind her, in every single photo. And in the last one I took before I left, the woman is looking directly at the camera. She followed me home. I don't know what she wants. I don't know how to make her leave. But I know this. I should never have recorded her crying. I should never have taken those photos. I should never have stepped foot in Slaughterhouse Canyon. Because some grief is so deep, so overwhelming, that it soaks into the land itself. And when you touch that grief, when you document it, when you take it with you, it doesn't let go. It needs someone to witness, someone to feel what was felt. I'm moving out tomorrow, leaving everything behind, but I don't think it will matter. I can still hear them crying, and every night the smell of river water gets a little bit stronger. Can a mountain remember the men it swallowed? I found out the answer 200 feet below Jerome, Arizona, and I wish to God I hadn't. My name is Zainab, and I'm an urban explorer, not the social media kind who does it for likes. I'm talking real exploration, abandoned buildings, forgotten tunnels, places most people are too smart to go. I've been doing this for 7 years, rappelling into locations that have been sealed off and left to rot. Jerome's a ghost town built on mining, clinging to Mingus Mountain like a scar. Copper made Jerome rich in the 1920s. Then the mines dried up and everyone left. What they left behind is a maze of shafts and tunnels, most of them blocked off, some of them just waiting. I'd been planning this descent for months, found the entrance to an old copper mine on the outskirts of town through surveyor maps from 1927. The shaft was supposed to drop about 300 feet before connecting to the main tunnel system. Most of it had been sealed with concrete, but I located a secondary access point, a ventilation shaft that had been covered with rotting plywood and forgotten. I went alone. Always do. Fewer variables that way, and I don't have to worry about someone panicking. I set up my anchor points at dawn, double-checked my rope, and started down. The shaft was narrow, maybe 4 feet across, lined with old timber supports that looked like they'd been there since Roosevelt was president. My headlamp caught layers of copper staining on the walls, green and blue mineral deposits that looked almost alive. The first 100 feet were fine, standard rappel, cool air, stable walls, nothing unusual. But around 150 feet down, I noticed something strange. The walls were moving, not collapsing, not shifting, moving, expanding and contracting, maybe an inch in each direction, slow and rhythmic, like breathing. I stopped, tested my rope, checked my harness. Everything was solid. I pressed my hand against the rock wall and waited. Felt it push outward against my palm, then pull back. Consistent rhythm. 4 seconds out, 4 seconds in. I told myself it was air pressure, some kind of pneumatic effect from the tunnels below. Perfectly logical explanation. I kept descending. At 180 feet, my headlamp died. Fresh batteries, checked that morning, and it just went black. I pulled out my backup light. It flickered twice and died. Third backup, same thing. I hung there in absolute darkness, 200 feet underground, feeling the walls breathe around me. That's when I heard the pickaxes. Metal striking stone, echoing up from below. Rhythmic, steady, the sound of men working. Dozens of them, maybe more. I could hear voices too, men talking to each other in English and Spanish, casual conversation. Someone laughed, someone coughed, deep and wet. The sounds were coming from directly below me, from a part of the mine that had been abandoned for almost a century. My headlamp suddenly came back on. No reason, just flickered and lit up. I looked down. The shaft continued for maybe another 20 feet before opening into a larger chamber. And in that chamber, I saw shadows. Human-shaped shadows moving across the walls, cast by a light source I couldn't see. Shadows of men working, swinging picks, pushing carts. I started climbing back up, fast, faster than was safe, my hands fumbling with my ascender in the dark. The breathing of the walls got stronger, more forceful. I could feel the rock pushing against my back, squeezing the shaft narrower. The pickaxe sounds got louder, like they were getting closer. Like whatever was making those sounds was climbing up after me. At 120 feet, I saw a shadow on the wall next to me. Not my shadow. Someone standing on the wall perpendicular to me, perfectly vertical, as if gravity didn't exist. The shadow raised a pickaxe. I watched it swing. The pickaxe passed through my rope. Didn't cut it, passed through it. And I felt the temperature drop 20 degrees. I climbed faster. My ascender slipped twice. I was gasping, my chest tight, the air in the shaft thick and hard to breathe. The walls were definitely narrower now, pressing in on both sides. I had to squeeze through spaces that had been wide enough on the way down. At 60 feet, I heard someone whisper my name, my actual name. A man's voice, raspy and broken, with an accent I couldn't place. "Zainab," it said. "Stay. We're still here. We're all still here." I didn't look back. Didn't stop. I hit the surface at 9:47 a.m. according to my watch. I'd been in the shaft for 42 minutes. It felt like hours. I pulled my rope up. The whole thing, not leaving it for later, like I usually would. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the anchor knots. I packed up and drove straight to the Jerome Historical Society. Asked them about mine collapses, about accidents. The woman at the desk pulled out a record book from 1927. 17 men died in a collapse in the shaft I'd just been in, 200 feet down. They were buried alive when the tunnel supports failed. The company sealed the shaft and moved on. Never recovered the bodies. The record said the collapse happened at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I looked at my watch. Tuesday, 9:47 a.m. The exact time I'd surfaced. That was 5 months ago. I haven't explored since. Sold all my gear. Deleted my documentation spreadsheets. But I still hear it sometimes. Late at night when I'm trying to sleep. The sound of pickaxes striking stone. The rhythm of the mountain breathing. And once, just once, I heard that voice again, calling my name from somewhere far below. I read something once about how trauma soaks into places, how violence and death can leave an imprint. I used to think that was metaphorical, but that mine isn't just remembering those 17 men, it's keeping them, making them work forever in the dark, in a space that breathes like something alive, something hungry. The walls were expanding and contracting at the same rhythm as human lungs. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The mountain was breathing, and I think it wanted to add me to whatever's down there in that darkness, swinging pickaxes at nothing, calling out names of people who are still alive. I'm never going underground again. Some places don't want to be explored. They want to be fed. And that shaft in Jerome is still breathing, still waiting, still working its dead in the copper-stained dark 200 feet down. Would you believe me if I said a ghost saved my life? Before that night on Highway 60, I wouldn't have believed myself either. My name is Anais, and driving alone at 2 a.m. isn't a big deal for me anymore. I actually love it. The quiet, the empty blacktop stretching endlessly under Arizona stars. The feeling that you're the only person left in the world. I just finished a closing shift at the diner and Globe, my feet aching and my mind already halfway home to Superior. The tips had been decent, my car had gas, and the night was clear. Should have been a perfect drive. But something felt wrong from the moment I pulled onto Highway 60. My phone kept losing service in places where I usually had full bars. The radio glitched, cutting in and out with bursts of static that made my skin crawl. The air inside the car felt heavy, thick, like it was carrying the weight of an oncoming monsoon even though the sky was cloudless. I cracked the window, hoping fresh desert air would shake off the growing unease settling in my chest. That's when I saw him. A figure walking the shoulder of the highway, caught in the sweep of my headlights. He wore old-style mining clothes, the kind you see in historical photos from the 1920s. Canvas pants stained with red dust, a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. Heavy boots that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. He didn't look up as I approached, didn't wave or stick out his thumb. Just kept walking, slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. I should have kept driving. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to keep going. But I slowed down. My hand moved to the brake without me telling it to. I pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of him and watched in my rearview mirror as he walked up to my passenger door. He opened it without hesitation, sat down, and said, "Thank you, Anais." My blood went cold. I'd never introduced myself. My name isn't on my license plate or visible anywhere in my car, but he'd said it like we were old friends. Then he said the nickname, the one only my grandmother ever used, the special name she'd whisper when she braided my hair as a kid. She'd been dead for 3 years. Nobody else knew that name. I stared at him, unable to speak. In the dim glow of my dashboard lights, I could see his face, weathered and lined, with gray eyes that seemed to look right through me. The smell hit me then. Old tobacco, the kind my great-grandfather used to smoke, mixed with something sharp and mineral. Like sulfur before a storm. Like the earth right before lightning strikes. "Where do you need to go?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer my question. Just stared out the windshield at the dark highway ahead and began tapping a rhythm on his knee. Slow, methodical, like he was counting something I couldn't see. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. The Superstition Mountains loomed in the distance, dark shapes against the star-filled sky. Then he spoke again. "Don't go back to Queen Creek next Tuesday, Anais." The specificity of it made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. "What?" "Tuesday. Don't take this road past Queen Creek. The thunder god in those mountains gets angry sometimes. He remembers old debts." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was giving me directions to the nearest gas station. I tried to laugh it off, that nervous laugh you do when something is too strange to process. "That's pretty specific. What happens on Tuesday?" He turned to look at me then, and his eyes were different, deeper, sadder. "You'll see. Just don't go." "Where should I drop you?" I asked again, desperate to fill the silence with something normal. "Here is fine," he said. "I just needed to tell you that." I glanced away from the road for half a second, just half a second, to check my speed. When I looked at the passenger seat again, he was gone. The seat was empty. The seatbelt hung unused against the door. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest, and pulled over. Grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the empty car. Nothing. Nobody. Just a faint scattering of red dust on the seat, and that lingering smell of tobacco and rain that hadn't fallen yet. I got out, checked the side of the road, walked back 50 feet looking for any sign of him. The desert was silent except for the distant sound of cicadas. No footprints. No figure walking away in the darkness. Nothing but me and my car and the endless black ribbon of highway disappearing into the night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been exhaustion. A hallucination brought on by too many late shifts and not enough sleep. I told my roommate about it over coffee, and she looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I couldn't shake the memory of him saying my grandmother's nickname, or the specific warning about Tuesday and Queen Creek. For 6 days, that conversation played on a loop in my head. His voice, his gray eyes, the smell of tobacco. Tuesday, he'd said. Don't take this road past Queen Creek on Tuesday. It was absurd. Crazy. But I couldn't ignore it. When Tuesday came, I had a shift in Phoenix that would normally take me right through Queen Creek on Highway 60. I called in sick. My manager was pissed. It was the third time that month. But I couldn't do it. Couldn't take that route. Instead, I stayed home, pacing my apartment, feeling ridiculous and relieved all at once. The next morning, my roommate shook me awake, her phone in my face. "Aeneas, look at this." The news headline made my stomach drop. Fatal 10-car pileup on Highway 60 near Queen Creek claims 6 lives. The crash happened at midnight, Tuesday. A sudden violent thunderstorm had swept through the area, sending power lines down across the highway and causing a chain reaction collision. 6 people dead, dozens injured, right where I would have been driving if I'd taken my usual route. I spent the next 2 weeks searching library records, old newspaper archives, historical society documents, looking for any clue about who that man might have been. The records showed dozens of mining accidents in the Superstition foothills from the 1880s through the 1940s. Men who disappeared into shafts and never came back out. Men who died in cave-ins and explosions and falls. And in one police log from 1943, I found something that stopped my breath. My grandmother's maiden name, listed as the family of a miner who died in a copper mine collapse near the Superstitions. I drive Highway 60 differently now. I still love the night, still love that feeling of being alone with the stars and the desert. But I watch the shoulders more carefully, listen to the warnings when they come. And sometimes, late at night, when the monsoon storms build in the east, I smell tobacco smoke in my car, and I know someone's still looking out for me. Some ghosts don't haunt you. Some ghosts save you. And if you're ever driving through the Superstition foothills, and a man in mining clothes asks for a ride, listen to what he has to say. He might just know something you don't. Some things stay buried for a reason. Do you know what happens when you dig them up? The first mistake was thinking Ruby would be just another ghost town with a few old bottles to collect. I was out there with 2 friends, both fellow amateur historians, because sometimes picking through dust is better together. Less lonely, more perspectives. Maybe even a shared joke to keep the desert silence at bay. That Tuesday had started bright. Cloudless sky, heat shimmering on broken window panes, the long drive peppered with old mining town rumors and pass-around stories. We meant to photograph, map, and maybe, if luck favored, find metal fasteners worth keeping. We fanned out across what was left of the schoolyard, our detectors humming in the late morning sun. One of us found a rusted horseshoe. Another got excited over a pocket knife dulled by 100 summers. Near the crumbling wall of the old adobe schoolhouse, my device whined sharp and constant. "Something deeper here," I called out. The ground, baked hard, seemed to resist as I scraped back gritty sand, until suddenly, under my hand, I hit leather, folded tight and wrapped with ancient torn wire. We crowded around, the 3 of us, grinning at the prospect of a find more unusual than the usual shell casings or oxidized coins. I'll never forget that moment. All 3 of us kneeling as I pried the thing open with my multi-tool. Inside, a thick braided clump of human hair, 4 small teeth, and a locket so worn with time that the face inside was more shadow than person. The leather bundle was stained with something dark that might have been old blood. For a few heartbeats, none of us said a word. Then, as if on cue, a sudden chill swept through, making goosebumps raise on our arms. Each of us fumbled to take photos before the unease overrode curiosity. "Who buries a bundle of hair and teeth at a school?" someone half whispered. The desert silence swallowed up any echo. We decided to leave the leather relic mostly undisturbed. The locket I kept, uncertain why, and we refilled the shallow pit, each of us suddenly eager to leave the sun-baked ruins. On the hike back to the car, the wind shifted and seemed to drag the sound of children's laughter, half heard, from behind the shattered windows. That night back in our motel, the sense of wrongness kept building. We tried to shrug it off with takeout and stories. But when night finally pulled us under, sleep was anything but restful. All three of us woke before dawn, shaken and sweating, with near-identical memories. A faceless woman from another century, dress swirling red dust, digging her hands and broken fingernails into the schoolyard's hard ground. "They're still here," she sobbed, over and over, surrounded by 5 shadowy, unmoving forms. And a weight rested on each of our chests, a pressure that made breathing hard, even after waking. We compared details, horrified by the overlap. Not just the setting and the grief, but little things, like the number of shadows, the color of the dirt caking her hands, or the exact way she whispered. Each of us still tasted metal on our tongues, as if we'd bitten down on an old coin in our sleep. None of us wanted to go back to Ruby, so we did what researchers do. We started digging through old archives, county records, and faded microfiche. In a musty library back in Tucson, one friend found confirmation. In spring 1921, a schoolteacher, name never listed, and 2 students vanished. No bodies ever recovered. Local legend claimed the schoolhouse was cursed, that after those disappearances no child in town would learn to read within its walls. Some older sources suggested a ritual, a last-ditch attempt by the teacher to anchor the souls of missing children, using hair and teeth as protection. For days, the nightmares persisted. Some nights we woke to grit on the sheets or the smell of ancient adobe dust. One morning, I found the locket, locked in my suitcase, resting on my pillow, faintly sticky and cold to the touch, as if it had sweated blood. Once, as the moon angled through my hotel window, I saw, just for a second, a narrow, dirt-streaked hand pressed against the glass from outside, then gone when I blinked. After a week, we couldn't take it anymore and drove back out to Ruby together, needing answers or closure. The schoolyard was oddly colder than before. Where we dug that day, we found 5 small stones forming a precise circle, and lying in the center, a single braid of human hair, black and gleaming. My friends insisted we take nothing, photograph everything, and refill the dirt again. As we did, we heard the faint sound of crying, thin and desperate, carried on the wind from behind the broken schoolhouse wall. We left that day, all unsettled. My friends both suffered recurring dreams for another fortnight. One even developed a cough that tasted like dust. Nobody from our group talks about Ruby much anymore, except in nervous, fragmented sentences. I keep the locket tucked in a locked box, unable to bring myself to throw it out or open it again. If you ever unearth something that radiates sorrow before you even see what's inside, you already know. Some pain lingers, waiting to enfold the hands that disturb it. If you're stubborn enough to keep digging, don't be surprised if the ghost town follows you home. I still chase history, still visit half-buried places, but I never, ever dig at schoolyards. There are ways the desert remembers, and in Ruby, remembrance and haunting are one and the same. The best you can hope for is to leave what you find undisturbed, and hope the dreaming dead agree to do the same for you. The Mogollon monster is just a story until it's standing outside your tent, right? I never believed in cryptids. Bigfoot sightings were for conspiracy theorists and bored campers with too much whiskey. But that changed the morning I woke up to the sound of something pacing the pine needles just feet from my head. My name is Kaya, and I'm a wildlife photographer. I've spent years documenting Arizona's backcountry, from desert canyotes to mountain lions, from rattlesnakes coiled in cactus shade to black bears raiding campsites. I know animal behavior, tracks, scat, territorial patterns. I know the difference between a bear's shuffle and a deer's nervous dart. What I encountered in the White Mountains that October morning was neither. When you camp deep in the White Mountains near Alpine, you expect cold nights, crystalline quiet, maybe the distant bugle of elk or the territorial hoot of a great horned owl. That Friday night felt different from my usual solo expeditions. I'd driven 6 hours from Phoenix, hiked 3 miles into a stand of ancient ponderosa pine and shivering aspen just west of Alpine. No other camps within miles, no cell signal, no distant hum of highway traffic. Just wind threading through high branches and the smell of pine resin thick in the thin mountain air. I'd chosen this spot deliberately, remote, pristine, perfect for photographing dawn wildlife when animals emerge from their night shelters. I set up my tent in a small clearing, cooked a simple dinner over my camp stove, and reviewed my camera settings as darkness swallowed the forest. But all evening, something felt wrong. The forest seemed to hold its breath. No birds called after sunset. Even the insects, normally a constant buzz in October, went silent as the last light bled from the sky. The kind of silence that makes your skin prickle and your lizard brain whisper warnings you can't quite articulate. I tried to shake it off, attributing the unease to exhaustion or altitude. I turned in just after midnight, zippering my rainfly tight and cinching my sleeping bag against the cold that settles into these mountains like a living thing. I hoped sleep would wash away the oppressive quiet, and I'd wake to a normal dawn chorus. But just before dawn, that gray threshold hour when the world hovers between night and day, I jolted awake to the sharp, deliberate crunch of pine needles. Not the scatter of a small animal or the shuffle of a bear. These were heavy, measured, bipedal footsteps. 2 feet, walking, circling. A cold shiver of pure animal terror shot down my spine. I froze, barely breathing, every muscle locked. The footsteps continued, slow, methodical, predatory. They circled the tent once, paused for what felt like an eternity, then resumed. Closer this time. I could hear the breathing now, deep, ragged, impossibly loud. Through the mesh window, I peered out with one eye, my body rigid, not daring to shift my weight or make a sound. And that's when I saw it, through the gray dawn mist weaving between the pines. A figure, 7 feet tall, maybe taller, covered in matted reddish-brown hair that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the trees. The proportions were all wrong, arms too long, reaching nearly to its knees, legs that seemed to bend backward at the joint like a goat's but supporting massive weight. Its head was broad, domed, almost conical, and it moved with an eerie fluidity, head flicking side to side like it was tasting the air. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me completely. Amber, luminous, glowing faintly in the pre-dawn gray, reflecting light that shouldn't exist yet. Not the eyeshine of a deer or the flat reflection of a predator. These eyes burned with intelligence, ancient, alien intelligence. They locked onto my tent, and the thing paused, blinked slowly, as if weighing exactly what I was, as if deciding. For 20 agonizing minutes, it circled my tent, sometimes walking, sometimes stopping to sniff the air, its massive chest expanding and contracting with breath that condensed in thick clouds. I lay frozen in a rictus of terror, fighting back the urge to scream, to run, knowing instinctively that either response would be fatal. The stench that drifted through the mesh was overwhelming, a nauseating cocktail of sulfur, decay, rotting meat, and something else. Something worse. Ancient. Primordial. The smell of something that had lived in these mountains since before humans dared venture into them. My stomach heaved and I vomited, barely managing to turn my head in time to keep from soiling my sleeping bag. The sound of my retching made the creature pause. I heard it sniff loudly, processing. Then it resumed its pacing, slower now, as if curious. As the thing paused directly behind my tent, so close I could hear the rasp of its breathing through the thin nylon, it let out a low, chuffing growl. Not a bear's growl, not a mountain lion's warning. Something deeper, more guttural, almost mechanical in its brokenness. The sound vibrated through the ground. Then, in 3 massive strides that shook the earth beneath my sleeping pad, it receded into the forest, and silence returned, but not the peaceful silence of dawn. This was the hollow, wounded silence of a forest that knows something unnatural has passed through. I stayed curled in my sleeping bag for almost an hour, ears straining for any hint of its return, certain that any movement would bring it back. But dawn broke fully. Birds began their tentative calls, and slowly, painfully, the forest returned to something resembling normal. When the sun finally crested the pines and painted the mist gold, I dared to unzip the rainfly. My hands shook so badly I could barely work the zipper. The forest was eerily still, mist lingering in patches, but the air remained thick with that terrible decay smell. I forced myself to crawl out and look around, my nose burning, my eyes watering. And there, pressed deep into the soft loam beside my tent, were the prints. Nearly 18 inches long, human-shaped, 5 distinct toes, a heel, an arch, but impossibly wide and pressed so deep into the earth that whatever made them had to weigh 400 pounds or more. I took photos with trembling hands, nearly dropped my phone twice, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were documenting. That's when I heard the rumble of an engine. A park ranger's truck appeared on the narrow trail, and a man in his 50s stepped out. He took one look at my face, pale, tear-streaked, covered in vomit, and his expression shifted from routine concern to genuine alarm. Then he saw the footprints. "Bear?" he asked, but his voice had no conviction. He knelt, measured the print with his spread fingers, and stood up a shade paler than when he'd crouched down. For a long moment, he just stared at the tree line. "I've worked these woods 20 years, he said quietly. "Seen bear tracks, elk, even jaguar once down by the border. Never saw prints like this." He looked at me. "Don't tell the other campers. They'll just turn it into a circus, bring in cryptid hunters and YouTube idiots. You get going, all right? And maybe don't camp alone out here anymore." I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I packed up my gear in record time, left the prints undisturbed except for my own trembling boot prints beside them, and drove straight down the mountain without stopping. The stench clung to my clothes for 3 days, despite washing them twice. The nightmares lasted 3 months. Back home in Phoenix, I tried every rational explanation: sleep paralysis, hallucination brought on by altitude and exhaustion, maybe even an elaborate hoax by some off-grid mountain dweller with too much time and a sick sense of humor. But the photos don't lie. The footprints don't lie. And sometimes, even now, when I wake just before dawn, and the world is that particular shade of gray, I smell sulfur drifting through my open window. I've never camped alone in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest since. People ask me what I saw. Other photographers, fellow outdoor enthusiasts, friends who know I'm not prone to exaggeration or hysteria, and I have no answer that fits inside the rational world I inhabited before that morning. Just a story, just a warning. Sometimes what circles our camps at dawn is not a coyote testing the perimeter, not a curious bear, not a prank. Sometimes it's the thing the old stories swear is only legend, the Mogollon monster, the creature Apache hunters spoke of in whispers, the thing that lives in the high pines where humans rarely venture. And if you ever see glowing amber eyes watching you through gray morning mist, if you ever smell that terrible ancient reek of sulfur and decay, if you ever hear bipedal footsteps circling your tent in absolute silence, don't move, don't run, and pray it decides you're not worth the effort. Because some things in Arizona's wild places are older and stranger than any field guide will ever document. They say every old hotel in Flagstaff has a ghost story, but Monte Vista wears its history like a badge. The front desk clerk looked amused when I requested room 306, almost like she'd heard the dare before. It was a drunken joke between friends, the sort you laugh about over whiskey at the hotel bar after dessert. I figured I'd sleep through the night, get a good story for my buddies back home, maybe feel a chill or two. The legends say that in 1947, 2 sex workers were murdered in that very room, strangled in their sleep, their killer never found. It was all just urban myth and dust, right? I figured I'd proven my nerves before. I'd seen the aftermath of car wrecks, handled my own share of restless nights. Ghosts don't bother guys like me. I let myself in, keycard humming green, and cracked a grin at the decor. This was historical preservation in the way only Arizona hotels could pull off. Brass lamps, 1940s wallpaper peeling in the corners, a bedspread with a floral pattern that looked like it had weathered more hangovers than I ever would. The smell hit me first. Old perfume, sweet and cloying beneath a layer of cigarettes soaked so deep into the drapes you'd swear someone was still chain-smoking behind the mirror. I set my bag by the ancient radiator and solved the world's easiest crossword. Outside, Route 66 was empty, except for the distant muted groove of a passing train. Around 11, the wind picked up, windows rattled their frames, the ancient heater coughed and moaned. Nothing unusual. Not until the clock, an actual analog clock perched on the nightstand, clicked past 2:57 a.m., and a cold, heavy press of dread settled over my chest. That's when it started. The room temperature dropped so suddenly, my breath steamed in front of my face. I rolled over, thinking maybe I'd opened the window earlier and forgotten to close it, but the glass was shut tight. The perfume smell grew stronger, mixing with the coppery tinge of old blood and something spicy, sick, like flowers rotting in a sealed jar. Shadows thickened in the corners, flickering with every passing headlight outside, and suddenly, every background sound died. Hotel silence. No more wind, no train, no hum from the ice machine down the hall. I'd almost drifted back to sleep when the feeling hit, a crushing weight on my chest, pushing the air out of my lungs. Cold, bony hands, impossible to see but iron strong, clamped over my mouth and nose. I jerked awake, gasping, but found my whole body sluggish, deadened, like my limbs belonged to someone else. I tried to shout, but no sound came out. My mind reeled back to the stories, the way the murdered women in 306 had died, smothered, suffocated, clawing for breath. Were the legends true? Was this some night terror, a sleep paralysis vision? I'd felt nightmares before, but this was something else. The crushing built and built until I saw yellow sparks behind my eyes. There was a faint whimpering sound. At first, I thought it was me, but then realized it was a woman's voice. "Help," she whispered again and again from somewhere behind my ear. I thrashed, half falling from the bed and hitting the scarred wooden floor. The force broke the spell. I could breathe, could move, but the air in the room was icy, thick with the smell of decay. My arms trembled. My chest ached, as if I'd run stairs for an hour. Footsteps paced the floor above me, slow and heavy. Impossible at that hour, since the floor above was supposed to be empty for renovation. Hoping for light, for a break in the weirdness, I switched on the lamp. The bulb sputtered and died. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, and only then did I notice the bruises. Bruises in the distinct shape of fingers. No mistake, no imagination, curling from my cheeks down to my chin, wrapping my mouth, pressing at the hollows of my throat. My reflection looked like a survivor of a bar brawl. Worse still, every time I looked away from the mirror, I glimpsed movement behind me. Shadows darting out of sight, always freezing mid-step. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just a bad dream, maybe a panic attack from too many horror podcasts and not enough sleep. But my panic only built as the clock ticked toward 3:13. I curled up in the armchair under the window, refusing to close my eyes again. The perfume smell thickened until I choked. The sound of sobbing came from the closet now, a choked, high-pitched wail that refused to fade, even when I buried my face in my knees. Just before dawn, I braved the hallway, escaping the room. I spent the rest of the night in the lobby, shaking so badly the early bird desk clerk offered me black coffee without asking. I booked 3:06 on a dare, I mumbled, showing her the marks. She didn't blink, just pressed her lips tight and handed me a pamphlet about the hotel's colorful history, all while never once making eye contact. I asked about security footage from the night. A pale-faced manager appeared 20 minutes later saying, "You left your room 7 different times last night, but the camera never showed anyone in the hallway when your door opened, not even you." He refused to answer more questions and quietly gave me a refund for the night. "People have complained before, but never like this," he said, sliding the keys into his pocket. I left at sunrise. The air outside was sharp, cleansing. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror on the drive home, half expecting to see the shape of a woman in the back seat, fingers pressing prints into the glass. 2 days later, the bruises lingered, shaped exactly like fingerprints. My friends back home didn't believe the story until I sent pictures. The purple marks, the pamphlet with the murder lore, my refund slip with the manager's scratch signature. I know what really happened, even if my rational mind still tries to twist away from it. Room 306 hosts victims, not guests. And if you ever think it's smart to tempt a place haunted by murder, remember, some ghosts don't care if you believe. They only care if you breathe. Ever had a ghost try to suffocate you in the exact way it was murdered? Because I have. And trust me, sleep isn't the only thing you'll lose in that room. What do you do when something carved 1,500 years ago decides to follow you home? I'm still trying to figure that out, and honestly, I'm not sure I have much time left before it finds what it's looking for. My name is Joey, and I'm an amateur photographer. Not the professional kind with fancy gear and magazine contracts, just someone who loves capturing Arizona's forgotten corners before they fade completely. The Deer Valley Petroglyph Preserve in North Phoenix had been on my list for months. Thousands of ancient Hohokam rock carvings scattered across black basalt boulders, baking under the relentless desert sun. I figured I'd get there around sunset when the light hits the petroglyphs at that perfect angle, making the symbols pop against the dark stone. The preserve was nearly empty that evening, just me and the creosote bushes, and the heat radiating off the rocks even as the sun dropped. I worked methodically, photographing spirals, human figures with elaborate headdresses, animals I couldn't identify, geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with some kind of meaning I'd never understand. The Hohokam vanished centuries ago, leaving behind only these carved messages and a silence so deep it felt alive. That's when I noticed something odd. Through my viewfinder, I was framing a cluster of symbols, a sunburst, 2 human figures, and a series of concentric circles. But when I checked the preview screen after the shot, there was an additional symbol I definitely hadn't seen. A tight spiral, maybe 6 inches across, carved deep into the stone between the figures. I turned back to the rock. The spiral wasn't there, not in real life, only in my photo. I chalked it up to a trick of the light or lens flare and kept shooting. But that night, reviewing my images at home, the spiral appeared in 7 different photos, always in a different position, sometimes at the edge of the frame, sometimes dead center, always looking freshly carved despite the weathering on everything around it. The next morning, I drove back to the preserve. I needed to see that rock again, needed to prove to myself that I'd just missed the spiral the first time. It took me 20 minutes to find the exact boulder. I'd logged the GPS coordinates like I always do, and when I did, my stomach dropped. The spiral was there, carved into the basalt, exactly where it appeared in my photos. But it was 3 feet to the left of where I remembered the other symbols being. I took more photos, documented everything. A park ranger wandered by, and I asked her about petroglyphs that seemed to move or change position. She looked at me like I'd been out in the sun too long. "These carvings have been here over 1,000 years, she said slowly, like I was a child. "They don't move." But I had proof, dated photos, GPS coordinates. The spiral had moved. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, the spiral has been following me. Not metaphorically, actually following me. It shows up everywhere, etched. In the foam of my morning coffee, traced in the condensation on my bathroom mirror, scratched faintly into the hood of my car. At first, I thought I was seeing patterns where there were none, the way your brain finds faces in clouds. But these aren't accidents. These are deliberate. Perfect spirals, always the same size, always placed where I'll see them. My apartment walls are covered now. I wake up, and there are new spirals I don't remember carving, drawn in what looks like charcoal or ash on the paint. My phone's photo gallery fills up overnight with pictures I never took. Images of the preserve, the rocks, that specific spiral growing larger and larger until it fills the entire frame. The timestamps say I took them at 3:47 a.m. I'm always asleep at 3:47 a.m. At least, I think I am. Time feels wrong now. Non-linear. Sometimes I'll be cooking dinner, and suddenly it's dawn, and I'm standing in my driveway, fingers black with something that might be soot. New spirals carved into the concrete at my feet. Hours vanish. I'll start reading and look up to find 3 days have passed. My hands shake constantly. There's a taste like copper and ancient dust in my mouth that never goes away. I went back to the preserve yesterday. I had to see if the spiral was still moving, still changing. The ranger on duty was different this time. An older man with sun-weathered skin and eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. When I showed him my photos, the progression of the spiral's movement across the rock face, he didn't call me crazy. He just nodded slowly. The Hohokam didn't just disappear, he said quietly, glancing around like he was worried someone might overhear. Some of their sacred symbols were meant to be left alone, markers, warnings, and some... He paused, studying my face. Some were meant to call. You took something when you photographed it. Maybe attention, maybe permission. Maybe your image captured something that wasn't supposed to leave that rock. I asked him what I should do. He just shook his head. People who disturb the old places, sometimes they get marked. And once you're marked, the symbol knows where you are. It's trying to complete something. Or maybe it's trying to take you back. Last night, I dreamed I was standing in the preserve at sunset, surrounded by spirals carved into every stone, every surface, spiraling up my arms in raised welts like brands. In the dream, I could finally read what they meant. They weren't decoration. They were coordinates, a map leading somewhere beneath the desert to chambers the Hohokam sealed before they vanished, places where time moves differently and the boundaries between carved stone and living flesh dissolve. This morning, I found spiral scars on both my forearms. Raised tissue, shaped perfectly, like they've been there for years. They weren't there yesterday. I'm sure of that. Almost sure. The spiral is in my vision now, even when I close my eyes. Rotating slowly. Always. Rotating. Getting closer. I don't know if it wants to consume me or transform me or drag me back to whenever it came from. I just know that in 3 hours, at sunset, I'll be back at the preserve. Not because I'm choosing to go, because I can feel the pull, like a hook behind my sternum, reeling me in. What do you do when something carved 1,500 years ago decides to follow you home? You follow it back, because really, you don't have a choice. The spiral decides. The spiral always decides. And I think tonight, at the place where it all began, I'm going to find out what it wants. Or what it's always wanted. What it's been waiting for, carved in stone, patient and eternal, until someone finally looked at it the right way and woke it up. I'm sorry I took that photo, but it's too late for sorry now. Can you imagine experiencing 4 hours in a place where 26 people died violently, but the living world says you were only gone 10 minutes? People visit Tombstone hoping for a brush with the past, but the Birdcage Theater makes sure the past brushes back, hard. It was a cool Friday evening when I arrived in Tombstone, the late sun painting old bricks orange and gold, shadows stretching long as the stories told about this place. As someone who lives for haunted history, I signed up for the last tour of the Birdcage Theater, eager for all the notorious details, the bullet holes, 140 and counting, poker legends, ghost saloon girls, and rough miners who never left. The guide was a swarmy guy with bad cologne and more enthusiasm than sense. He gathered us at the entry beneath gas lamps, setting the mood. We were 7 in our group, all tourists, a family from Florida, a retired couple, and me, solo with my camera. As we stepped inside, the velvet gloom and tarnished brass hit me. The place is small, claustrophobic, packed with tables and original fixtures. Smoke stains clung high above the stage where so many rough nights played out. The tour started in the main saloon, with stories of Doc Holliday's poker prowess and the infamous 26 deaths. I snapped photos, curious how many bullet holes I could count. We wound through the upstairs boxes, private, cage-like spaces where wealthy guests watched shows and, rumor says, sometimes made other arrangements. Downstairs, the guide led us to the basement. The air turned colder, the stone walls feeling damp beneath my fingertips. I drifted at the back, taking slow exposures, fascinated by the old piano tucked in the shadows and a line of faded whiskey barrels. That's when it happened. I let my group get ahead, crouched for a low shot of bullet-scarred brickwork, then stood up and realized I couldn't hear their voices anymore. The air was thick with silence, cottony and pressing. My phone buzzed, then blacked out, even though I'd been fully charged minutes before. I called out for the guide, but my voice was weirdly muffled, as though stuffed behind velvet curtains. From somewhere above, a piano began to play. Ragtime, bright and wild, but off somehow, too fast, as if someone was hammering on the keys in drunken joy. Laughter spilled down after women's giggles, men's deep cackles, the clinking of glasses, and a round of applause. For a moment I thought the theater had staged a haunting for the tourists. But the haze was wrong. It rolled in thick, stinging my throat, heavy with the twin scents of old whiskey and gunpowder. Shadows flickered as the saloon filled around me with transparent figures, some sharp and others blurred at the edges. Men in frock coats, women in trailing dresses and peacock feathers, a bartender pouring drinks no one would ever finish. One dealer, green visor pulled low, dealt phantom cards while the chips on his table made a bright percussive clink. I pressed against the cool wall, heart thumping in my throat. Then, amid the crowd, a man in a blood-stained vest turned and looked me straight in the eye. His face was both young and ancient, but his eyes were utter voids, twin black holes that seemed to suck in all the sad light. He smiled, a glint of gold among broken teeth. He held up his cards, and as the smoke shifted, I saw they were all aces. He laid a finger to his lips, and every ghost in the room looked at me. Gunshots cracked. 1, 2, 4, in rapid chaos. Blood sprayed across the floorboards, vanishing as it fell. Poker chips scattered like hail to my feet, vanishing when I reached down. The laughter grew harder, bordering on cruel. The dead didn't just want to be watched. They wanted an audience, and I was the only living soul who could see them. Or maybe I was just the only one foolish enough to stay. As the chaos swelled, I found I couldn't move. The haze thickened, sinking into my lungs. The harder I tried to breathe, the tighter the air pressed down. I realized, in a flash of terror, that the stories weren't about ghosts. They were about reliving old violence night after night until time itself fractured. And then silence snapped down. The air snapped cold. All the ghosts turned toward me, black-eyed dealer in front. The music stopped. In that awful quiet, every memory of gunfire and drunken song vanished, replaced by a ringing pressure in my skull and the sickening certainty that I wasn't alone. I tried to yell, to run, to break the spell, but the shadows pressed in, and my legs turned to sand. Next thing I remember, I'm sprawled on the rough brick floor. My head throbbed, my limbs leaden. I dragged myself to the stairwell only to find the heavy door locked from the outside. No handle, no latch, just immovable oak. I pounded until my hands hurt, screaming for the guide, for anybody. The voices on the other side sounded far away, distorted. When the door finally opened, light hit me like a slap. The group was there, confused. The guide's voice had lost its fake charm. He said they'd only just noticed I was missing, and I'd been gone maybe 10 minutes tops. My own watch, digital, waterproof, reliable, claimed I'd been gone over 4 hours. Sweat glued my shirt to my skin, and smoke stains ringed my throat like a half-remembered hangman's noose. I barely managed to get outside. The night air was clean, sharp as a razor, but I couldn't shake the smell of whiskey and burnt powder crawling through my nostrils. My phone screen flickered to life, showing photos I don't remember taking. Grainy, flickering images of shadowy crowds, the glint of the dealer's gold teeth, bullet holes up close and black-lipped with darkness. When I looked back at the theater, I swear I saw that gold-toothed man grinning in the window, mouthing words I'll never hear. Back in my motel, time did not feel right for days. I'd catch my reflection in a mirror, gaze drawn to black spaces where my eyes should have been, vanishing when I blinked hard. All week, poker chips would appear in pockets I hadn't used, and the sharp smell of cordite would swim up from my skin when I showered. Night after night, I woke at exactly the same time I'd blacked out on the basement floor. I sent my photos to friends, but somehow the faces don't show up, just fog, scratches, sometimes a grinning fragment of gold. One friend, who grew up near Tombstone, told me she's known locals who slip and spend hours on the wrong side of midnight, only to come back with someone else's memories. I think that's true. I haven't been back. The birdcage doesn't want me to. I dream of cards on green felt, a piano wailing, bullets cracking air gone thick with smoke. I know exactly how long I was gone. I can still feel those hours, even if the world says I lost just 10 minutes. So, if you ever linger too long in an old saloon, keep track of your time. If the music starts up and you see a smile full of gold teeth, get out while you can, because the Birdcage Theater keeps its memories, and sooner or later, the house wants them back. What happens when you disturb a place where mothers and children were massacred over 200 years ago? Even if you mean well, some land remembers, and its sorrow doesn't care about your intentions. I've always believed history is best felt feet on the ground. I traveled all over Arizona, exploring ruins, sun-baked ghost towns, neon-lit diners, never quite satisfied until I'd stood on the ground where legend bled into fact. Canyon de Chelly, though, was different, alive in ways that felt colder, heavier, sacred. When I arrived in the Navajo Nation, the late afternoon light made the canyon walls burn orange. The stories of what happened at Massacre Cave simmered beneath every moment. Textbook history says that in 1805, Spanish soldiers attacked a group of Navajo women and children sheltering on a ledge. Bullets, smoke, then silence. I hired a Navajo guide, careful to follow the proper protocol. He was polite, younger than I expected, with a cautious manner and eyes that flicked up to the canyon rim as we drove into Canyon del Muerto. The air was crisp, the only sounds our boots crunching on dry gravel and the distant caw of a raven. The cliffs soared overhead, 800 feet high, vertical stone blazing with rust and shadow. My guide told stories of creation, of clans crossing rivers, of the canyon as both cradle and grave. He warned that certain places should be left alone, especially Massacre Cave, but I wanted to see, to feel the history myself. We hiked in silence along the rim, wind ghosting through the junipers. When we neared the cave, a dark slit in the sandstone, inaccessible except by perilous ancient trails, my guide stopped. His whole posture changed, body turning rigid, voice lower than the wind. "This is far enough," he said, eyes averted. "I do not go closer. No one from here should." I tried to press, but he shook his head. "This place holds pain. It still echoes. Even the sand remembers." He leaned against a pinyon, looking away, and refused to go further. I went ahead anyway, unable to resist the gravity of that empty space, The silence changed, thickening as if the stone were holding its breath. My shadow reached the edge before my feet did. I raised my camera for a shot of the infamous ledge, sun tracing the petroglyphs etched above it. Hands, spirals, animal tracks, all sharp with ancient pain. That was when the voices began. First, a distant chorus of women's cries, high and thin, magnified into something almost inhuman by the canyon. It grew clearer, children wailing, a woman screaming something I couldn't understand. I felt the air chill. Goosebumps rose. Every hair on my arms lifted. My guide, far behind, began chanting softly in Navajo, but I only caught fragments on the wind. I snapped photos as the sun slipped behind the rim. Through my lens, I saw flickers, transparent figures on the ledge, shapes of women clutching infants, children pressed flat against the rock, all bathed in the dying amber light. They faded when viewed with the naked eye, but in the camera screen they lingered, faces frozen in mourning and terror. The air filled with the smell of old smoke, and something sharp, metallic. Suddenly, the canyon itself seemed to inhale, a long, sucking silence followed by a great, echoing sigh. Sand shifted under my boots. I became certain something watched, weighing my trespass. I hurried back to my guide, heart hammering. He looked at me as if I'd aged a decade since we'd started. "Did you hear them?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a sprig of sage and told me to sleep with it that night. "Don't look at your photos until you leave this land," he instructed. "And whatever you hear, don't speak any names." That night in Chinle, the sense of dread wouldn't ease. I stayed in a plain, clean hotel room, walls painted a dull beige. But sometime after midnight, I woke to a pounding at the window, a deep rhythmic thudding like fists or drums. The air was electric with the smell of iron and earth. When I snapped on the lamp, I gasped. Red handprints covered the walls from floor to ceiling. Some were child-sized, others were broad and strong. They glowed faintly in the electric light, shimmering like petroglyphs burned through the paint. On the glass, handprints pressed outward in splayed, desperate patterns. Against the far wall, I saw a single word scratched into the plaster: "Remember." I pulled out my camera, heart thrumming. Every photo taken that day showed more figures than I remembered. Women, children, shapes draped in woven blankets, always in groups of 115, never facing the lens. In the last photo, all figures stood, with backs to the camera, staring off the ledge toward the red-stained sand. My own reflection was among them, face blurred, eyes closed. I tried to call the front desk, but the phone only made static, echoing the cries from the canyon. In a panic, I burned the sage my guide gave me, choking on its sweet smoke. As the room filled, the handprints faded, slowly, then all at once, leaving only clean paint behind. My chest loosened, the air warmed, but the next time I looked in the mirror, a crimson handprint lingered at my throat. There, but insubstantial, fading as the sun rose. The next day, I returned to thank my guide. He smiled sadly when I told him, then reminded me, "This place grieves, but it endures. Respect is the only offering it takes. Take nothing else home, not even images." He urged me to delete the last picture. I did. But nights since, I sometimes dream of crying women, of children clutching red-dusted stones, of ancient voiceless grief. And every so often when I wake at midnight, there's the soft echo of hands beating on my hotel walls, and the word "remember" pressed foggy into the glass. If you ever walk the path to Massacre Cave, tread lightly. Some echoes never leave. Some spirits, when disturbed, come home with you, their pain as etched into the land as it is into memory. It's one thing to see a ghost, but what do you do when the ghost is the one looking for you? There are hotels that try to modernize their history, and then there's the Hasayampa Inn, a 4-story red brick artifact that refuses to let go of the past. My plan was simple: a night's stay in room 426, the so-called honeymoon suite, where locals mutter about a bride who never left. Most brush off the legend. A young woman, abandoned by her husband on their honeymoon night in 1928, found hanged from the balcony by morning. But enough people in Prescott avoid that room that I couldn't resist. The room itself was beautiful in a grieved sort of way. Old wood headboards, a chandelier that glimmered dull gold, velvet curtains that felt heavy, even with the window open to November air. All I wanted was one good chilling story for my channel. I didn't expect the room to actually live up to its reputation. I unpacked, noted the strange way sound faded past the threshold, and explored the hotel's long, silent corridors. Portraits in sepia smiled secrets from every wall. There was an edge in the hush, the kind you feel when the world is holding its breath. The staff smiled but avoided questions about room 426, offering only, "You know about the bride," before trailing off. After midnight, I settled in to edit a video by lamplight. At 2:59 a.m., the lights flickered and went dead. The air chilled so sharply I could see my breath. Music, thin, warbling like a wedding waltz on scratchy vinyl, rose beneath the floorboards. That's when I heard her footsteps. Tap, drag, tap, drag. Not loud but persistent. My heart hammered. There, at the foot of the bed, stood a woman in a faded white wedding dress, her veil nearly sheer, her eyes shining black in the dark. Even in the dim, I saw the bruised ring around her neck and the tear tracks on her cheeks. She pointed to the balcony without a word. A pulse of dread pressed me up, refusing to let me lie back down. I crossed the room, the curtains billowing with a wind that didn't touch my skin, and opened the door to the little wrought iron balcony. Moonlight sparkled on the rails. There, in a patch of frost on the glass, a shape appeared. A noose, intricately looped as if pressed by an invisible finger. The bride drifted closer. Her hands, cold and trembling, brushed past my shoulder. Her lips moved, soundless at first. Then I heard, barely more than breath, "He never came back." The words hurt. A sadness so dense I nearly wept. Somehow I knew she wanted company, not harm. But as I tried to comfort her, a crushing longing pressed me back into the room. I stumbled, and suddenly the lights snapped on. The music stopped. The temperature returned to normal, leaving only silence. I tried to sleep, but each time I dozed off, nightmares dragged me back. Her face staring through the window, the feel of rope, the sound of sobbing out on the balcony. I woke at dawn to find a silver wedding band, sitting on the nightstand, a relic I'd never seen before. Too small for my finger, but ice cold to the touch. As I packed, a staff member knocked, asking if my night had been peaceful. "You didn't see anything, did you?" she said, forcing a smile. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. When I looked back into the room, every window was fogged from the inside, shapes like hands or faint looping ties visible on their surfaces. Driving home, I felt haunted by the echo of "He never came back." That night, I dreamed of the bride standing by my bedside, waiting, not angry, just eternally expectant. In the morning, my bathroom window bore a loop of condensation in the unmistakable shape of a noose. Not every haunting is violence. Sometimes, it's loneliness that lingers, the promise of a final dance never had. If you crave the truth behind Arizona's most tragic ghost stories, subscribe to Haunted Fears on YouTube, where every legend finds its witness, and you might hear the next midnight knock.